My name is Ashley. I'm on the marketing team here at Cobalt, and we will be having the infosec manager at Cobalt and then the CTO at Cowbell speaking. I will go ahead and start the presentation. All right, awesome. So our session is on fixing vulnerabilities at speed, how engineering and security can achieve true DevSecOps. Before I hand it over to our speakers, I just wanted to run through a quick agenda. They are going to do introductions on themselves and also the companies that they're from. Then we'll dive into the content, defining DevSecOps, best practices, processes, tools, and roles, and also building your own security program. And then lastly, we will have a couple minutes to do Q&A, so feel free to drop anything you guys have in the chat. You can also drop some questions during the session. I'll make sure to get those answered. All right, Mark, I'll pass it over to you.
Sounds good. Hi, I'm Mark Scrano. I'm the Information Security Manager here at Cobalt. Been with the company since February this year. Previous experiences have led me through a number of startup industries, including video streaming, cryptocurrency, and numerous other different industries. That's kind of it for me. I'll pass it over to Josh.
Hi, I'm Josh Chan, CTO at Cowbell, and formerly VP of Engineering at Imperium. I manage our tech strategy and our engineering teams and IT teams, and yeah, also have previous startup experience in various industries.
Cool. So let's get right into the meat of things. So we're here to talk about what is DevSecOps. And obviously the key thing is there you see three different components, right? There's Dev, Sec, and Ops, right? So the combination of development, security, and your ops team is kind of the best practice today to get to the ability to secure your software that you're delivering. We've had DevOps for a long time, and it kind of is relevant to kind of bring that into the conversation of how we got to DevSecOps. At first people started automating the build pipelines and the deploys of their applications, and then they would get to the end, and the security requirements would be left hanging there. And the security team would be the impedance to slowing down the deploys, making sure that you're testing all of the application security and all of the key components that your developers and your operating team may not know all of the functions or things that you're expecting. So a lot of times this would lead to requirements changing at the end of a project and having to circle back and kind of slowing down the process and costing you lots of money. By integrating security through all the phases of development and the operating and deploying, you can basically bring yourself up to a very fast and rapid mechanism to be able to build your product and deploy your features. Go ahead and move to the next slide, Ash.
Yeah, so as a part of DevSecOps, probably a good place to start is processes, and it's about what you're trying to achieve. SOC 2 compliance or FedRAMP, those have a very specific process you go through, and those can be very long processes that require quite a bit of human investment in that as well. So understanding, that process and what you need to do to stay in good standing once you achieve that certification, to stay in good standing with it. So, for instance, in the public sector, oftentimes you have to disclose like any vulnerabilities as found within a certain time frame, and you have to submit to a third party for review, and then you have to work to close this out on a specific timeline. For tools, there's static code analysis. You can contact third parties for pen testing. So understanding those processes and those tools and how it works with your organization is vital to implementing good DevSecOps. On the security side, you'll have people that are experts in understanding how to navigate those tools and relaying that information over to your app dev people, who can either be upgrading the software or upgrading the infrastructure. It could be, patching a version of your operating system. It could be disabling an outmoded version of TLS. 1.1's no good, 1.2 is no good. So you want to eliminate that as well. And so yeah, so just understand those different roles, responsibilities, the processes, the tools, and how those work together in your organization to continue to stay on top of your security. And you definitely, like, for instance, like going back to like FedRAMP, you definitely want to make sure that you stay in good standing. You don't, like, once you achieve that, you don't want to lose that. And so again, like bringing that full circle, and yeah.
So obviously one of the key factors is how do you align with the teams to define your goals clearly, make sure that you're getting good metrics to be able to identify and resolve your open findings quickly as possible. You know, a lot of times security starts to take more of an advisory role and begins to start to educate the developers and the operations teams on how these things are interpreted, how the tools that they're working with are understood. But making sure that you align on these key KPIs is going to be important to making sure that you have a successful security program.
Yeah. And like developers, oftentimes they just want lists. They want like clear, simple lists, just tell me what to do type of thing. So, if you're using a tool and it has like, it finds some CVEs, being able to categorize those, pointing them to the line of code that is an issue. If it's a package and that thing has been, that's been found as a vulnerability and there's a new version available. A lot of tools out there will do that. If you use like GitHub, there's plugins for that. Or if you use tools outside of GitHub, if you use something else, there's tools that you can plug in together, and DevSecOps can definitely help you facilitate that. Early warning. So nobody likes to be caught at the last moment and saying, hey, there's this critical thing and we have to have this done by tomorrow. Nobody likes that. 0 days, obviously those are the exception. Those should be the exception, not the norm. So, implement, setting up your processes such that you're able to provide early warning, categorizing those as like critical vulnerabilities or moderate or low, and being able to align your team such that they are in agreement on how to handle that, and then just supporting that process. So sometimes it can seem like there's a little bit of friction between the goals of security and the goals of application development. But in my experience, when those two parties work together, it actually is really great, and people start to figure out how to solve problems together and build a better security process.
And obviously one of the key themes that you'll hear about a lot of talk around DevSecOps is shifting left. So this is moving security responsibilities to every phase of the SDLC, and including, I kind of like to make an analogy of like the highway. You include some guardrails to kind of keep your developers on the road. And, even if they slip or slide a little bit in some rough conditions out there, you got those guardrails to kind of prevent you from going off the highway for the most part. So implementing checks in your CI/CD pipeline is one spot. Implementing integrations with your IDEs is another place that you could get a lot of more feedback to your developers. The earlier they get feedback in the process, the quicker they can work to address these issues, reduces the amount of errors that you're going to see. It's going to reduce the cost of remediating issues in production. It's going to eventually get you increased speed to deliver a secure product to your customers. Really shifting left is about building those guardrails and kind of aligning your strategy with with making sure that the developers who aren't necessarily the experts in all of these areas aren't going to shoot themselves in the foot accidentally. So finding the right tools that meet and work with your stack and to help you identify and potentially block these issues or help remediate them before they get to production is a key factor for DevSecOps, excuse me. And obviously the last part around of the last aspect of DevSecOps that we want to touch on is really having a security culture, right? And having, all of the stakeholders feel some level of responsibility for the security of the product they're building. At the end of the day, we're all, working together for a singular goal, and we're trying to kind of align and, reduce redundancy and reduce the amount of work that's on everyone. And by sharing the workload, And by educating all the developers and continuing to push forward with a culture of, no blame and things like, constant education and learning is very key to making sure that you have a successful culture around your security program as well.
I fully agree with that. And when I think about culture, I often think about leadership, right? Like I think culture starts with leadership, and so if your leadership is concerned about security and is connecting at an individual level about why things are important and why it's important for the business, why it's important for a healthy work stream, so we're not getting caught with like last minute 0-day criticals or something like that, or not 0 days, but last minute criticals that we could have prevented earlier. I think that's a big part of like leadership and culture. So when your managers are structuring those processes so that people understand it as a part of their work, I think that lays a great foundation for having good conversations and collaboration between security and app dev teams.
Yeah, I'd like to definitely echo that sentiment and say that, the management has to prioritize security as well. Because if it's not a management for the top, then the people below them are going to see that, and they're not going to prioritize the workloads as well either. So I think making sure that you have really good alignment from the top down is important with any security program. And having that structure clearly defined, who's responsible for which aspects of things, reduces the ambiguity for people and helps drive clarity in your workloads.
Yeah, like for your app dev leads and your security, whoever's heading up your security and whoever's heading up your app dev, if they have a great relationship and they are building a process together, it's going to lead to good outcomes every time. Yeah, if those are just kind of like siloed off and they're not really working together, and then at the last minute you're just getting like a list of stuff, yeah, most people are going to be pretty frustrated. So
yeah, I find that building checklists and key lists of items that kind of we have to run through all these things before something's ready to deploy, and making sure that all of the stakeholders have their feedback in those checklists is a really good way to have that process. Then also just communication between the teams. Make sure you have regular stakeholder meetings and that people have the ability to voice their concerns of anything that might be concerning to them. You can look at things through the lens of different person and see things that maybe you didn't see before. So I think that's also a key aspect of having collaboration in the process.
I see we have some Q&A. I feel like it's really relevant. Maybe we should just address it like head on. So, so this first one, interesting point about how security is all about setting up practices, but how do you make sure you continuously enforce it, especially in a growing organization? Mark, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, growing is always challenging, and aligning across different teams is also a challenge, right? Because you have a lot of different people involved. Making sure that again, I think it's key that things are coming from the top down, and you're organizing your company in a structure where those top people can share risks and concerns with each other, and that will help drive the program below it to kind of align some of these things. Obviously, you're going to deal with different managers and different departments that may want to tweak things or do things slightly differently. And as long as you're getting the same goal at the end result, that's important. But it's all about teaching, and from the security side, educating the people to have the power to not be blocked, when they're in their day-to-day job. Teaching them how to respond to these alerts. But like I said, getting to the point where you can put those guardrails in place is key. Obviously, you can't just turn them on day zero when you roll out a new tool that's going to be able to help you in this area. But making sure you have a thoughtful process to get to the point where you can start enabling that blocking and you're not impeding the day-to-day work, it does eventually get you to a place where you can have comprehensive controls initialized and deployed across the company to kind of help that. And like I said, it's all about the guardrails for me, like making sure those controls are in place.
Yeah. When you join like a startup or when you're starting up a new company, it's like an everything all the time, all at once type of situation. It's hard to make sure you're developing the product and making it sellable and also making it secure. And so as the company starts to grow, you start to appoint people that can help manage specific areas. I think that word continuously, that's really the key. Like DevSecOps is a practice. It's a continuous practice. Actually, I was reading just yesterday or the day before, I was having to write something and I was like, is this continually or continuously? And continually means at some frequency, and continuously means to do something without ceasing. And so as you begin to develop that DevSecOps culture, it becomes a continuous culture where they're constant. They build in the tools, they build in the processes, and so as a part of like your dev pipeline, you're like where you're first building and deploying into like a dev integration environment. That's a great time to go ahead and have like static code analysis set up, and that's a great way to continuously, as a part of your continuous integration, your continuous deployment, to already have those checks in place. And that's also a great way to give your teams early warning. And that's also a great way to start setting up SLAs and agreements around, okay, this is how we treat criticals. This is how we treat moderates. This is how we treat low. Going back to the FedRAMP example, criticals have to be resolved within 30 days. Moderates have to be resolved within 60 days. Lows have to be resolved within 90 days. Everything must be disclosed. So, if that's what's important to the company and you align your dev and sec teams around that, then you can start building to support that process continuously through your DevOps, DevSecOps tools and processes. I hope that's a good answer.
Yeah. Looks like we got one more question here. Let's jump into this one. How does configuration management fit into DevOps? Could we achieve DevSecOps without continuous delivery and procedures? And that's a tough question. I mean, really, I do think that configuration management obviously is an important aspect of being able to deploy your infrastructure rapidly and at speed. So, I mean, it's going to depend on your cloud provider and the services that you're consuming from them on what deployment, really works for your company. But configuration management is important, right? Because that's like setting up your app and making sure that you've got secrets embedded in there, however you got to deploy your secrets and different things like that. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider when you're getting into that. There are tons of tools for scanning infrastructure as code and implementing checks into the CI/CD pipelines to help you kind of arrange secure configurations and configuration management stability, so that you're putting all of your config files into SCM, GitHub, or other tools to kind of track and make sure that you've got a static configuration that you're delivering and doesn't drift and things like that. Configuration management tools are good for obviously making sure that those things don't change and monitoring the situation. So I think it's a key component, and I think there's a lot of things that the infrastructure as code scanning tools can do as far as identifying potential vulnerabilities and configurations and helping to remediate things like misconfigurations. You can even get tools that'll help you look out for open S3 buckets if you're configuring stuff with Terraform. There's all sorts of different checks that these things can be looking for, and just kind of give you that assurance that nobody's going to accidentally deploy secrets in your code base or different things like that. There's lots of different capabilities that these tools give us that help secure configurations.
Yeah. I was going to give that same example. There have been a number of exploits over the past few years on open S3 buckets where people were putting, content that should have been secured. And when you're using like, cloud technology where everything's just a click, database is a click, servers are a click, S3 buckets is a click, and it can be very difficult to say, was this done with secure best practices if you don't have automation in place? And even if it is, if you're only checking it on some interval, not something that's continuous, it can be very hard to know at the rate that's changing, your landscape's changing. I would strongly encourage to invest in continuous operations, continuous tools, continuous processes. Build a team that can pull that information together and make smart decisions. It's so much better than what would happen if you were to be exploited.
So we got one more question here. Would there be a trade-off between developing DevSecOps culture versus product, especially in the early stage? I'm going to say, I mean, yeah, there's some differences. Obviously, when you're early on, you want to be out there first to market. You want to beat the competition and all that stuff. But I think developing your DevSecOps culture off the bat is really going to give you the ability to produce quality at speed, right? So obviously, I don't know what your requirements are, but obviously it's a trade-off. Everything with security is always a trade-off of convenience versus, security, right? So that's the one thing you have to kind of see where it fits into your business, what level of risk are you tolerant with, and things like that. So obviously, the sooner you can develop this culture and implement it, the sooner those guardrails are set up, and the less likely somebody is to make a critical error that impacts the company. So I think it's important to do it at an early stage and to start to develop those processes. But it's also about improvement over time, right? So you're not going to start out with, a fully locked down pipeline with every control in place that you want. You're going to have to look through those controls and say, hey, right now I think this is more important to me. This is the area that's going to impact our app more. I'm concerned with this X, Y, Z. So you focus on those areas where you think there's more risk or there's more criticality to the components, and I think that will allow you to kind of drive, the continual improvement and the process improvement over time.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like, in the very beginning, you're going to try to figure out, like, how do I get to tomorrow, and it is good to go ahead and start, you're going to want to deploy somehow. And so, and you'll quickly realize in your deployment that taking out some of the manual steps there and automating that will give you more time to continue to develop your product. And that's a great time to put in some early sec tooling of some kind. But at some point, you're going to be challenged to achieve like SOC compliance, or maybe you have SOC compliance, and a couple of years later you decide you want to go take the product to the Department of Defense, and they're going to say, well, you need to be FedRAMP compliant, right? And so or FedRAMP certified. So there's going to be stages, and those different stages and challenges are going to come back and check your processes, and you're going to want to level them up again. And you may realize at that point, what, we actually need to put a person here just to head up this whole operation. So it'll evolve. Yeah, it'll definitely evolve, and like necessity is the mother of invention. You'll need to keep driving yourself forward.
So we got one more question.
Yeah, best practices for spotting bugs early. I think this one, putting tooling into your DevOps pipeline is the great way to do this. Both for like unit test type bugs, like just like code quality bugs, but also for security bugs. And there's the code scanning has really advanced, a lot. It's before it was just like the static analysis, was just like package signatures and things like that. But now, it understands, like, do you have certain cookie attributes enabled? It knows where to find that depending on a wide array of different app stacks you could be using. So yeah, I'm going to say putting newer sophisticated tools in your build pipelines is a great way. If a developer's going to merge code and they're going to merge unsecured code, why would we not just stop it right then and there and help educate that developer and put a better standard in place? So, and it's very hard to do if you're doing that manually, or if you're doing it after the fact, like in some sort of audit. If you just build it straight into your DevOps tooling right up front, that's the best place, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the sooner you can get the feedback to the developers, the better it is. So I like integrating with the IDE if you're using static analysis tools, because it instantly gives them feedback at the time they're typing it. You don't have to context switch later to know that, hey, what is this thing doing that I wrote this code about? You're right there, you're in the moment, it's giving you instant feedback, and it kind of can help you do some identification of bugs, right? It's not the end all be all. There's obviously other layers that you want to implement. You want to implement as many layers as makes sense for your company. You want to implement, things like standard pen testing, even. Like, you want to make sure that even once you've written the code and it's deployed, some of these tools won't detect certain types of bugs, classes of bugs, for example, indirect object reference, right? There's not really a tool that's going to scan and find out that there's a problem with your business logic, that you're not checking the authorization that somebody's allowed to do something, even though they're authenticated into the platform, right? So you want to make sure that you have a comprehensive methodology for testing as well. You don't want to skip anything because, like I said, scanners can only do so much. There is some level, thinking outside the box and getting that hacker mindset going to kind of dig into these things as well. And if your developers have that mindset, they'll start thinking about these things as well. So once they start being educated and seeing, oh, hey, last time I wrote this chunk of code, I remember there was a pen test finding. I forgot to do this auth check, and then boom, there was a bug. So they'll start to learn and educate themselves as well as educate the teams around them. I think a lot of those learning opportunities are great to share within the team because, if one person doesn't know it, maybe there's a chance that somebody else doesn't know it, and you're leveling up your whole team as you go through the process there as well. So I think those are key components.
Yeah, I think those are all of our questions that we have. Thank you, Josh and Mark, for speaking today, and thank you to the Scrano team for hosting us. We hope you guys enjoyed the content and enjoy the rest of your CTO Masterclass today.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time. I hope all of you got your questions answered. In case you wouldn't, I'll just attach Ashley's ID and contact details. So in case you want to know more about pen testing and DevSecOps, they are the right people to ask. And sorry. Thank you so much. Our next session with the LeaseWeb team is on in 5. So stay tuned. We're going to be talking about cloud architecture and how to understand the right cloud based on your use case. So we'll be right back.